Okay, in this video I just wanted to kind of address a question that I get asked a few times, and that's sort of what is going to be a better option, using PD power or using a dummy battery. And it's not a simple black and white question, so I'm just going to go through, pros and cons for each, and why you might want to consider one over the other. So first out, we'll start with PD charging, and if you don't know what this is, essentially a lot of newer cameras, they accept kind of USB delivery or USB power delivery, so you can plug a USB port into the side. I'll link to a video I've done about this in a bit more detail, but essentially what you can do is you could plug into a V-mount battery, and then you'll see on the top of the camera it's charging, or we can use something like a power bank. If we use this Anchor one, so we can just pull the USB-C out of there, plug it in. You'll see again on the top, we've got that charging. So that is the sort of crux of USB PD power. So it's something that you plug into the side of the kind of USB port, and you just deliver in power from whichever external battery you want to use. And the kind of pros for this is, obviously it's very simple. You don't really need too many accessories to do it. You just need a decent USB-C cable and some kind of external power bank or battery to power it. And along with that, there's little risk to doing it, because this is essentially a manufacturer approved option. So plug in a PD power into a camera, so long as it supports it. You need to have a quick look in the manual. If you don't know if your camera supports it, have a quick check if it allows kind of USB power delivery. But yeah, it's a kind of safe option, and it's manufacturer recommended. So like I say, it's a nice simple way to just keep the battery topped up on the camera. So the cons of it, really, some of this is Lumix specific, but the cons of it are that it will tie up the USB-C port on the camera. So for the Lumix cameras, some of them, not all of them, accept SSDs to record to, and you'll need the USB-C port to do that. So if you've got power delivery going into the camera, that restricts that port, and essentially you won't be able to do that. So that's when you might want to be looking at using a dummy battery over the USB-C. Another reason is that USB-C cables generally, not that I know of anyway, that I've seen, have any kind of lock-in connection. So and you can get cable clamps for the side of a camera. That can be a workaround to it, but essentially it's just a cable, and it can come quite loose, and it can come out fairly easily. So it's one of those things where you just need to be aware of that. And depending on what you've got, with something like this, you've got one point of failure because it's attached to the actual power bank. With one like this, you've obviously got 2 points of failure. So it could come out of the power bank, it could come out of the external battery, or it could come out of the camera. It's just you need to kind of keep an eye on that. And one of the things that is actually a little bit of a sort of pet peeve for me on the Lumix cameras, at least, you switch it on, and then when you've got PD power going, I'll leave the lens cap on so you can kind of see. Let me just try and focus on that quickly. So essentially on the screen, it's still quite far away, but you get this tiny little icon above the power bar just to tell you that it's charging. So it's so easy. If the cable just gets knocked out, when that disappears, it's just you barely notice because it's such a tiny icon. I really would have preferred if Lumix had put in like it just said PD somewhere on the screen, or something to that kind of effect that's a bit more noticeable and you can actually tell that it is charging, or maybe just change the color of the the battery indicator. And one thing to consider, if you're thinking of buying a dummy battery, like a V-mount battery to actually power the camera, and PD charging is your main sort of way you want to do it. There probably are better options out there. It depends what your setup is. I mean, if you're just planning on using this to do PD charging to the camera, I would personally say you're better off just using a power bank. They come in different sizes. They're much more, they're easier to mount than a V mount, because with a V mount, obviously you need to get it onto a V-mount plate. The V-mount plate quite often has to be onto a cage or rails. I've done a video about this kind of stuff, so I'll link that up in the corner. But you know, with a power bank, you could do what you want with it. Really, you could just stick it onto you know, onto a hot shoe plate, or you can Velcro it onto, you know, like the leg of a tripod. Or it's just a bit easier to just kind of stick that onto something and just kind of tuck it out of the way, because you know it's just a power brick. Whereas, like I say, with this, I'd say ideally, if you're going to use a battery like this, you really want to be considering powering something else with it. So whether that's using one of the jacks on the top to power a monitor, or you're going to use a D-tap to power something, I think you really need more than one use for the battery. But personally, I mean, I use the D-tap for my camera, I use the jack port on here for my monitor, and then I will also be looking to use the USB-C port to charge additional things as well. So for me, a V-mount battery is really a multi-use battery, whereas like I say, the power bank is more of a you're just using it to just top up the battery. And then that kind of brings us to the sort of pros of a dummy battery. And again, for me, it's kind of the part of it comes down to the kind of readout of it. So you know, depending on what you've got plugged into a V-mount, they tend to have quite nice accurate power indicators. And again, it depends what your camera's like. You might have a really good power indicator on the camera that's very accurate. I really don't find that on the Lumix cameras. It's quite poor. Like, it just goes down in you know, in 20% increments. It's not really that useful for me, to be honest. So, you know, a dedicated battery can give you like a bit more of a readout there and give you a bit more of an indication of exactly how much power you've got left. And then obviously, you know, this goes against the other thing we said. It just frees up the port on the camera, so you've got that available for kind of other things. So you've got that as a pro. You know, you're not actually tying up any of the ports, because all you're doing is replacing the battery with the dummy battery. Another thing is that depending on what cable you get, you know, there are good and bad cables really to kind of buy for each kind of camera brand. But you know, if you buy one that is actually recommended for your camera and fits into it properly, so like this one has a detachable break in the cable, so I can put that into there, drop the dummy battery in, shut the bottom door, and then that's a really tidy way for me to just feed out a power source to a V-mount battery on like a rig or rails, or you know, whatever it is. It's just a really neat way. It's come out of the bottom. I can just run it past the plate on the bottom, and whereas, you know, with USB-C you've got to open the side of the door. I mean, you might already be using a monitor, so it may not make any difference, but you know, you've got to have the side door open. You've got to run out the cable from that. Quite often USB cables are a little bit awkward. You can get some quite nice ones like right angle cables and things like that do fit in quite well on certain cameras. You've got to be aware of the distance from this and all the rest of it, and how big your kind of headphone ports and things like that are, if they're going to interfere with each other. So you know, it can get a little bit messy sometimes with PD power, you know, using the USB. So you know, for me that's quite a nice plus, that you can just neatly run the battery out of the you know, run the cable out of the battery door like that. And then, you know, once you've got you know, the dummy power coming out, you've got the option to have all kinds of different sizes of V-mount batteries. So you could have, you know, as much or as little power as you want to run into the camera. So you know, it's one of those things where obviously PD power, it's only really going to allow you to get power into the camera, whereas your V-mount, again, like I say, it's much more versatile. You can save having batteries for your monitor, save having batteries for additional little lights or things like that, and or it could be a focus, follow focus, or you know, whatever it may be, whatever accessories. It just sort of allows you to power it all from here and not have to have lots of different kind of batteries. But for the kind of cons of the dummy battery and battery solution, one of the worst kind of things can be if the battery does shut off unexpectedly. Something happens, you know, it might be that the cable gets knocked out of it, it could be that the readout on the battery maybe wasn't quite right. If the battery shuts down and the camera loses power, what will happen is quite often the last video file, maybe the video file you're recording, or part of it, depending if you're using something like segmented recording, which I'll link up to in the corner, It could be that the clip you're recording at that time gets fully corrupted. There are things like the Lumix repair tool, if you're on a Lumix camera, of course. Again, I'll link up to that, where you can kind of recover sometimes files if they've been corrupted. It doesn't always work, but it is an option. But essentially, if you're if you're using PD power and that runs out, it just switches back to the battery in the camera. When the battery in the camera runs out, it does a proper shutdown. Whereas if an external battery cuts out, the camera just completely does a forced shutdown essentially. So there is the possibility of losing files. And then obviously you've got the potential risk of it as well, because the sort of online is just absolutely flooded with really cheap third-party cables, cheap third-party V mounts, and there's all kinds of power solutions, and some of them are a lot more risky than others. So if you are going to kind of explore using external power, definitely stick to well-known brands. Always check around for reviews and things like that. Make sure that what you're buying is correct for the camera that you're using. Always make sure that your battery can handle what you're trying to feed power out to, and that it's all going to kind of actually work. So it's just one of those things where if you fry your camera using incorrectly using external power, it's not one of those things that's going to be covered by a manufacturer or a warranty. It's just going to be invalidated through that, because this isn't something that Panasonic or any other camera company recommend that you do. So you've just got to be very aware of that and be careful when you're using kind of external power. Like I say, use well-trusted brands, do your research, just make sure that you're not cheaping out on power, because it's going to cost you if it burns your camera out. So that's just something to be aware of. But yeah, like I say, it's just I kind of just wanted to give a bit of a kind of a balance against the two. Like V-mount batteries are great, using power banks and PD power delivery is great. It's just different kind of situations for different devices for different shooting situations really, and just deciding which one is right for that kind of use case. As I say, one thing to bear in mind is V-mounts are a lot easier to, if you are going to have a rig, a V-mount is a good choice, because like I say, it can power additional things. It's easy to get a V-mount plate and attach it to a set of rails. But if your camera's just sat on a tripod or something, just having a power bank set up on there is quite a neat little option just for extended power. It might be that you shoot an event or something like that, and I've used these in many situations just where the camera's been static, and this one actually I'll just put onto a hot shoe mount sometimes, and I can use it sort of in a run and gun style. But it's like I say, there's just different use cases for both, so just kind of bear that in mind. But if you've got any questions, obviously feel free to drop them in a comment. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more Lumix content specifically, check out the Lumix playlist on this channel, and please subscribe.